Welcome back, everybody. I am excited to introduce the second panel of the day. Our guest speakers will dive into the Tesla success story and analyze what can be learned from it. This panel will be moderated by William van der Bijl, who is the senior analyst at Delta EE. And it's high time I introduced all the panel speakers. Please feel free to nod or wave whenever I say your name so we all know who you are. Sebastian Peck, the Managing Director at InMotion Ventures. Thank you. Cindy Choi, the Managing Director for the European platform at Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures. Maureen Lebeau, Partner and Head of Venture Capital at VID. Riley Brennan, the General Partner at Trucks Venture Capital. And Patrick Elftman, the investment partner at Future Energy Ventures, and also Terhi Vapola, who's leader and founder of Helen Ventures. Have a fruitful discussion, everybody.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today as we discuss multiplying Tesla's success story and what are the learnings for future mobility companies. My name is William van der Bijl, and I'm a senior analyst at Delta EE, which is a research consultancy focusing solely on the energy transition. As you would have heard from the introductions by the MC, we have a great set of panelists today with a lot of experience and a lot of diversity. So to start us off, could each of the panelists please provide a brief introduction to their fund and share what the USP of their fund is? Riley, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'm Riley Brennan, live in San Francisco, one of the founders of a small investment fund called Trucks. And Trucks is a first check into companies trying to build a better form of transportation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Riley. Terhi, are you okay to go next?
I can go next. So my name is Terhi, and I represent Helen Ventures. Helen Ventures is the investment arm of Helen, the energy company here in the Nordics, and we focus on the energy transition. So for us, the angle into the e-mobility comes from charging and charging capabilities, and looking at this discussion from that angle.
Thank you, Terhi. Sebastian, over to you.
Sebastian Peck, Managing Director of InMotion Ventures. We are Jaguar Land Rover's venture capital arm. We are an early stage investor based in London, investing in all things mobility, sustainability, and of course, electrification.
Great. Thank you, Sebastian. Maureen?
Hello, I'm Maureen Lebeau. I'm leading the venture capital activity of VID. And VID is a subsidiary of the group Mobivia, a leader in the European car maintenance. And we are not only a VC, we do also majority investments, and we do lots of animation of the ecosystem around mobility. And we invest mainly in mobility services.
Great.
That's
and
it.
Patrick, can you finish us off, please?
Sure. It's Patrick. I'm a partner at Future Energy Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of E.ON. And E.ON is one of the largest utilities in Europe, with more than 50 million customers. We have teams in Berlin, Tel Aviv, and here in Palo Alto. We invest in future of energy, future of cities, and future of technologies. And future of cities is mostly on prop tech and electrification of mobility. And I think that fits nicely to this panel discussion.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. So yeah, an awesome set of panelists, which should result in a really fruitful discussion. So starting with the title of this panel discussion, which is Multiplying Tesla's Success Story. Tesla has, of course, done really well for itself. We all know about its share price and how strong the brand is. Sebastian, with InMotion, you coming from an automotive background, what are the lessons mobility startups can learn from Tesla?
Yeah, so I guess when you look at Tesla, I mean, they emerged as a company that clearly has ushered in a massive shift in the industry towards electrification and electric vehicles. And I think in the course of this, they've built a massive advantage in terms of know-how, in terms of entrepreneurial drive to really define where the industry is headed. And I think when you look at this from a startup perspective, I guess there are a couple of lessons here, maybe to take away. One is look for really the big shifts, the big paradigm shifts. If you're looking at an industry, how may that industry be disrupted? What is the sort of the long-term trend? And then really relentlessly put your weight behind it and pursue a strategy that is really built on achieving a competitive advantage by being really the first one to move into this field. I think the other thing that is sometimes forgotten is just how scrappy a startup Tesla was at the very beginning. I mean, the first car was effectively a sort of Lotus Elise that was sort of modified, and that became eventually the Tesla Roadster. So don't be afraid if you have a bold vision to basically start with a very basic prototype of what it is you're trying to achieve, and then build confidence in your investor base as you are pursuing that vision, and as you build your knowledge base in pursuit of that vision. So I guess that's how I would look at it.
Thanks, Sebastian. Terry, with Helen Ventures, you coming more from an energy background, and what are your key learnings from Tesla and their success?
I would more say, for me, Tesla is a representation of putting the customer first and looking at the big vision, what you need to create. So as we are dealing with the systemic solution needed, so it's super hard for kind of a startup to come in and say okay, we'll do this part, and then expecting everybody else to do the things around it, like here, just doing the car, and then expecting the others to do the charging stations for that, and just waiting that to happen. So I think what is really inspirational about Tesla is saying that, okay, we make sure that the whole thing works for you, customer, and addressing that. So it's kind of the same as if you look at it from the what happened in the mobile phone industry, and thinking of the Apple business model type of providing the whole solution, versus then like a horizontalization of the different layers. I do believe that the horizontalization is the way. So having the different perspectives to this ecosystem also in the e-mobility to take place when the industry becomes more mature. But at this stage, I think kind of pave the way and show how things happen. Tesla has done a tremendous job to speed up things.
Definitely, and I think putting the customer first is not something the energy sector traditionally has been very good at, but it's not always the easiest to create a whole ecosystem as Tesla has done. If you're a startup, you obviously don't have as much funding. Do you have any views on from a startup perspective how to go about that with limited resources, limited funding?
Who's that question for, Will?
Riley, if you're happy to go for it. Okay,
I'll take it. Sure. Just building on what my two co-panelists said, I think Tesla's kind of opened up a bunch of new integration points, and so Tesla's really not about one thing, but about pulling a few things together, from charging to over the air to direct sales, and obviously EVs that are more performance cars than anything. And I think startups are every single component of Tesla probably has 7 or 8 startups that are trying to sell that same technology to other manufacturers and suppliers. So particularly if you just look at batteries, we've seen a huge growth in battery management system startups who know that so many companies are going to be buying expensive batteries, and fundamentally the value of the car is going to be about the battery. And so how do you manage those? That's just one example. And there are so many more, from OTA to everything that Tesla's doing. So yeah, I basically think if you took Tesla's core components, laid them on a table, I could point to 6 or 7 startups in every facet of it right now.
Yeah, that's really, really useful insight. Maureen, do you have something you want to?
No, I wanted to build on this because I looked at preparing for the panel. I looked back at the story of Tesla, and I was like, that's really not a usual startup. So if you look back, it has been created in 2003. Elon Musk invested in 2004. They sold the first cars with the production at scale in 2008, so 5 years later. And they were profitable for the first time in 2018. And then profitable for the first time for 4 semesters in a row, in July 2020. So the story was really long. So if you were an investor in 2003 looking at Tesla, you would have a startup come up to you and say, hey, look, I have a great idea. I will create a startup built on a hardware, first, super capital intensive, second, that won't sell a product in the next 5 years, and that won't be profitable for the next 15 years. My company will disrupt a super conservative and highly subsidized industry. And I will need to completely change, as Terry said, the infrastructures that are currently not at all adapted to the use of my product. However, invest in me because I will have a great positive impact on the planet. So unless you know some visionary, a bit crazy guy with deep pockets called Elon Musk, I really doubt that you will find capital to finance your venture with the story of Tesla. Because when you see the current trends, and especially during COVID time, so I'm sad about it. I'm not saying that you should not look at being the next Tesla, but the current trends, they don't show a great appetite for disruption at all. Investors tend to focus a lot on industry that benefited positively from the COVID, for instance, and also companies that are focused on data and software with recurring revenue, and they are ready to pay a high premium for these companies. So valuations go super high for these companies, and they are not so great for the other ones that doesn't comply with these specificities. And as a VC, the VC are built to earn money for their investors. They are limited partners. And so if you have a super capital intensive company, it's complicated for you to make the bet because you need to generate a good return in 5 to 7 years after having invested for your LPs. So time to market and product market fit is really key. And for Tesla, I think it was super difficult to foresee. And as you look, so that was for the VC part. For the CVC part, there might be other objectives than financials because it can be strategic objectives. But I don't know, and sorry sorry to say it, but I think it's true, and we have to be aware of that. But I don't know many corporates who really have the courage to radically disrupt their own industry. It's super difficult to do, and we haven't seen it much in the financing world. So that is why I think Tesla is an exceptional story to me. And I don't think that it can really be multiplied. However, the good news is that evangelization has been done, and they promoted a lot of for a cleaner transportation ecosystem. And it became like being concerned about the planet became mainstream. And regulation has never been as much in favor of clean transportation in Europe, for instance, and it should be much easier to prove your product market fit if you want to. But I would rather build a company. If you have the vision to build a rocket, don't forget that you have stages and that you have to build it step by step and with reasonably achievable objectives. And so that's why I would trench it a little bit. But
yeah, I agree. And I think Tesla definitely has paved the way for a lot of startups in the space. Patrick, you look like you had a point there.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what has been said. I think the takeaway for a startup is here, start small, but also have a master plan in mind. I think the story of Tesla is very special. And there were a few points in time where it also might have ended. But I think, now it's looking back, it's easier, but I think there's a bigger master plan and a lot of things need to come together for that. But it's basically Tesla. What is Tesla? Is it an OEM? Is it a software company? Is it an energy company? And I think that's where also Riley said a lot of pieces come together and makes it so interesting. And I don't think you can, start this from scratch, trying to do everything at the same time, obviously, but having a plan in mind, where do you want to go, and having that customer in mind, building that customer proposition. And I think then if you're successful doing so, the pieces fall together.
Yeah.
Can I sort of quickly chip in and sort of offer the contrarian view here, because I don't actually agree with what has been said. I think you have examples of companies that have actually emerged in Europe, as well as of course in the United States, where people have had quite a bold vision and have had the balls to really go for a big goal. You look at ESA Aerospace, you look at Lilium. Those companies have found backing in Europe, and I think it's really, really important not to sort of convey the impression that you should go in and have a manageable plan that some risk-averse VC can sort of go and happily fund. I think that really is the wrong impression. I think I would never invest in a founder who didn't have a big ambition. Now, how you get there is in incremental steps potentially, and that is actually what happened with Tesla as well. But at the end of the day, exceptional entrepreneurs have to have a big vision. That is just part of the mix. And if you're doing just more of the same, which does happen, admittedly, and there is this sort of trend sometimes, especially in European VC, kind of Me Too business models, etc. And you have sort of the fifth startup that is buying up Amazon merchants and what have you. That does happen as well. But I think there's another side to it, and I think what makes venture capital as opposed to private equity or whatever is the ability and the tolerance for risk to really take bold bets. And you have to, of course, when you look at it from a portfolio perspective, you have to have a view where you probably have a risk diversification strategy to say you do finance some moonshots and some big bet balls, but at the same time you also put your money in things that probably have a slightly more sort of a clear path to monetization and to exit.
I think that's a really good point, Sebastian. From your experience with InMotion, how often has those grand visions or big plans of startups changed and pivoted along the way as the startup has matured?
So I think the one sort of investment we made, which is was quite bold, and where the return we could potentially realize wasn't clear at all, was Voyage, right, which has now been acquired by Cruise, a self-driving car company that basically had a really, really distinct market entry strategy focused on retirement communities in the US, and was building something really, really interesting. But we had absolutely no sense of how long it might take for this to become even remotely commercially viable or even technically feasible. But we took the risk because we felt this is something, if it works, it can potentially win big. So I think and this is sometimes what you have to do. You have to sort of take a view of if someone gets to the very end of where they want to be, are they building a sort of a category defining business? A lot can go wrong on the way, and in this case, obviously Voyage didn't or doesn't belong to the companies that have managed to build a standalone business akin to Cruise or Waymo that sort of is set to dominate the industry. But history might have turned out differently. Who knows?
Thanks, Sebastian. That's really great to get your personal experience there. Maureen, you mentioned COVID, and I think it's a pivotal moment, obviously, in human history. But Riley, I think touching on that point, how has COVID impacted your investment strategy, if at all?
Our investment strategy, I don't think it's really been impacted that much. Probably our investment process, just because we've had to evaluate all but one startup virtually over the last 12 months, and still on the same investment pace, which is we make about 10 investments a year, 8 to 10. And our companies that are focused on delivery, have obviously done a lot better. And it's interesting because our fund has done more autonomous vehicle investments than anyone, and we have always believed that commercial delivery and the B2B part of AV was really valuable. But I think up until COVID, most of the global media and VC interest in autonomy was around robotaxi. And we always thought should probably be the opposite, that all the commercial segments are more valuable. But I would describe all the commercial, parts of AV and the delivery parts of AV as kind of being like the Sancho Panza of autonomous vehicle investing up until last spring. And now it's totally flipped in that, everybody is so interested in the delivery and supply chain aspects. So that's maybe made it easier for some of our portfolio companies who are focused on that area to, get more customers, probably get more investment interest, et cetera.
So that's obviously insight from a mobility perspective. Terry or Patrick, coming from a more energy-based perspective, what has the impact been for you? Maybe starting with you, Patrick.
Yeah, I think our investment thesis didn't change much. So we are not investing in mobility per se, but more in the electrification and the underlying technology. So it was interesting to see. I mean, with people being at home, obviously charging happened more in the home. So how do we deal with that, and how do we make sure the grid actually works? That was a topic we looked into, and we looked into companies dealing with smart charging in the home. 89% of the charging happens at home, even if there's no pandemic. So that's a big topic in order to flatten the curve, and in both senses, and decrease the stress on the grid. So that's something we looked into. And help our customers, to save energy with EV tariffs and smart charging. At the same time, optimize against CO2 emissions.
Yeah, you touch on a really, I think, interesting point, and this is an energy tech summit, but of course, there's an energy transition, but the mobility sector is also undergoing a massive transition, and there's that obvious intersection between the energy space and the mobility space. Terry, from someone involved in the energy space, how has the intersection of these two sectors impacted your company?
For us, we see very much increase if you think about what has happened lately. So all the forecasts, how the EV business is growing, have been updated. For example, the latest Goldman Sachs figures going up in terms of the assumption of how the market will grow. So at the moment, it really looks like the EV business is taking off, and we are going into the fast pace. And then also being supported by the Green Deal here in Europe, and looking at the activities to actually increase the market willingness to not only from the energy charging perspective to have the charging points and the network available, but also the tightening of the standards also for the OEMs, which increases the offering of the EVs into the market. So at the moment, it seems like this intersection certainly is happening. So we see that the two industries are coming together, and I think that. And this has been a long road as well, so taking some time to get where we are today. But now it looks like the acceleration is really tipping off, and we see that also in our portfolio companies.
Can I complete with mobility services, more on the services side? Yes, the COVID has had a tremendous impact in Europe on the bike use, actually. And in France, the bike use has increased by 30% post or first lockdown, and 70% in Paris. And Paris became a huge city for biking, and so it completely changed the way we use mobility in France. It's about the same in the rest of Europe. with the investment in infrastructure too. We have much more bike lanes nowadays, and it's a positive circle that allows the boom of bike usage. And this allows for new services around bike maintenance, a second-hand marketplace for bikes, all kinds of new way of consuming your mobility. So I think that's a huge shift and really pushed by the COVID. A second big trend was the boom in electric vehicles in Europe. And that leads to a lot of innovation again. And the third trend, I don't want to be too long, but the third trend that we've seen is the boom of e-commerce that led to a huge boom in the last mile delivery companies. Because the last mile delivery, the delivery is the last point of contact, and nowadays the only point of contact with your clients. And so retailers put much more efforts nowadays in these last mile delivery services for the customer experience to be good enough for their brand to be well represented through this only contact with the client. And pushed by regulation for cleaner transportation and by this boom of e-commerce, we see lots of opportunities around last mile delivery, clean last mile delivery services. Not autonomous, as Riley said. Maybe we're not less advanced as in California, but we don't have much robots in our streets, but a lot of bikes, cargo bikes, light vehicles. Yeah.
But also for the autonomous, thinking of where it happens first. So robot taxi being the most difficult application. So looking at the applications where you are in more like a limited space or more industrial context or something where you have less like thinking of step by step how to get into the autonomous. So I think it's also the question of where it starts and how it starts.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Thierry. And Maureen, you mentioned the difference between, say, Europe-based VC and a States-based VC with Riley. I think that moves us on to quite an interesting point about the different regulations in those different areas and how that can impact investments. I don't know, Riley or Maureen or anyone else on the panel, if you've got an opinion on, say, a States-based VC versus a European-based VC and how the regulation there impacts the investment process or the investments that you make.
Yeah, I mean, regulation is one of the 8 areas of risk we're always looking for. So when we're trying to assess what companies are, the risk they're going to have to eliminate, regulation is one of the biggest ones. In the United States at the moment, depending on if we're just talking about autonomous vehicles, obviously it's been a state-by-state kind of rollout for different laws. And the federal level hasn't really had much in the way of AV rules. And I would say the feds have also had a very soft view of the lower levels of automation, what the SAE would call level 1, 2, and 3. So it's been at once a confusing way to build companies as well as an opportunity, I think, because, depending on your access to different states, you could theoretically test vehicles in certain parts of the US where you couldn't in others. And there are, 4 or 5 states right now where you can, run automated vehicles without somebody in the driver's seat. And it's not that way across the whole country. And so you definitely have to be sympathetic to that. I do think that we are probably more interested in the ways that the regulatory environment is going to change in some of these areas of investment. We're not, I would say, scared of existing regulation so much as we are looking for opportunities of where the macro trends are going to lead people. And, the other thing I would say is we made more energy investments in the last 12 months in the run up to knowing that we'd likely have a Biden administration and we'd likely have probably a decade of zero emission transportation focus in this country and probably globally. And that has definitely impacted the way we think a lot about this stuff. And, I think all of us on this call are probably thinking we're in the very beginnings of a great decade with a lot of zero emission focus, with mostly a lot of regulatory support.
And Thierry already mentioned the Green Deal in Europe, which is super important for all of us because net zero for 2050 has lots of implications, and our push forward for cleaner transportation modes and solutions, definitely. And I think it's a bit the same, really, in Europe. Each country and even sometimes each city has its own regulations. So Roma was one of the first to ban diesel inside the city. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to really understand who does what and where the regulation is the most favorable. But globally, it's super favorable. And in France, last year, we had a big law that orientates the mobility for France. And it's not only it's at every single level. So it's like zero emission zones in the cities that will be enforced. So it has lots of implications. The promotion of micro mobility and clean mobility for employees. Data sharing for any kind of mobility company, for you to be able to build, thanks to the data, new kind of services, etc., etc. So the regulation is super favorable, and that's why it's quite exciting because the time to market is the right one. And I've been in VC for a few years now, and the depth of the mobility deal flow that I see in the past few years is completely different from the depth we had a few years ago. And now, like in Europe, I've seen 600 startups last year in the mobility space, and with high quality startups, with good entrepreneurs, because the time to market is good and because there is a convergence of regulation, people concerns of cleaner mobility, and and good entrepreneurs seizing opportunities, I think.
I think that takes us nicely back to Sebastian's early point around what learning from Tesla is picking up on those long-term shifts and those paradigm shifts, and regulation is obviously one way of helping to identify those. Maureen, you mentioned there's a lot of mobility startups in this space, and I think one thing we have noticed is the valuation of mobility startups versus, say, the incumbent OEMs, and there's a bit of a mismatch there. I don't know, Sebastian, if you have a view on that.
There's obviously sort of the Tesla phenomenon. If you look at sort of public markets and you look at the market capitalization of Tesla versus, let's say, VW, I think Tesla is somewhere around 700 billion. VW somewhere in the sort of 170 billion, whereas VW obviously produces 10 times more cars than Tesla. And there's certainly sort of a bit of a dislocation in public markets. I mean, what it ultimately reflects is an expectation on behalf of the investors that Tesla somehow can grow, certainly to an extent that it becomes one of the biggest manufacturers in the world. But I think there's also a lot of expectation that it will very much go beyond the electric vehicle and find ways to build new businesses and sort of, if you like, drive in a very entrepreneurial way in adjacent industries and come to dominate there as well. And whether or not that is going to happen, we will see. I think OEM valuations have been historically very, very low, and we've recently seen a bit of a correction. Whether that is going to continue, we will see. I think when you look at some of the significant shifts that are happening in the industry, and I don't want to sort of talk about Jaguar Land Rover, but let's say VW, I mean, they're committing over the next 5 years, 35 billion euros, for the drive towards electrification. I mean, the amount of money that is being put towards, clean or emission-free cars is just astonishing. So there will have to be some sort of, catching up, I think, in terms of, what the market attributes in terms of value to those companies. But the time frame in which that happens, we will see.
And Sebastian, you mentioned around Tesla potentially moving into adjacent industries. I think we've seen examples of that. And Patrick, that touched on a point that you made earlier.
Yeah, the question is, when I look at these, let's say other startups, not Tesla, is it what kind of company is it, and what market are they addressing? So, the question in Tesla, and you can't go, I think, by traditional metrics evaluating the company, because is it an OEM, or is it a technology company, or is it even more an energy company working on solar and storage, etc. So, and the energy market is much bigger. So there's a huge potential to grab even more, and that's how we also look at startups in that space. And from a utilities perspective, I mean, EVs are just batteries on wheels. But so the question is, what can I do with that? How can I integrate it in my energy system? And let's be honest, we're promoting to reduce energy consumption, but EVs are the source to generate more money for utilities. But our responsibility is to do that in a smart and greener way. So with teams in the US and teams in Europe, that I can see still a big difference in valuations. But for me, the key when I look at the startups is what market are they really addressing? And with the intersection of mobility in the EV space and energy, I think it's really interesting. And coming back to the point, having a master plan in mind is key to then execute on your vision.
And kind of building on that, so if you think about the whole energy transition and going into the renewables, which are dependent on weather. So if you have a windy day or you have a sunny day, but you still need to be able to provide electricity, even if it's not, and especially in those days. And then finding out the solutions and the means to do that. So exactly as Patrick was saying, so being able to also leverage on distributed architectures and the batteries in the cars. So vehicle to grid type of technologies are super interesting because that really provides something which can become quite fundamental when we go further.
Couldn't agree more, Terry. And I think, as usual with these interesting discussions, time always gets away from us. And I thought, as a way to finish off, it would be really interesting for the audience if we could just go around one by one and as a way of signing off, identifying one investment that you are most excited about from your fund and why. Riley, can you please go first?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all, and to all my co-panelists. I will say that I'll just give the most recent, which is a politically correct way of saying this, since our fund has many children and I wouldn't want to pick just one. But our most recent one that was announced is Universal Hydrogen. And what they're doing is they created in some way like the Nespresso pod for hydrogen, in that they don't want to be in the business of making hydrogen. They really just want to be able to move it around safely, whether it's for aviation or trucking or maritime. So you could think about like the capsule being able to complete the supply chain within hydrogen. And their first markets will be aviation, and they just raised a good Series A. So that's the one I'm most proud of and most recent. And I'll turn it over to my next panelist. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Riley. Well maneuvered answer. Maureen, over to you.
At the ID, we had lots of successful investments because we already exited a few of them, like Drivey, we sold to Getaround in 2019. And in 2020, we sold the two companies, Swiftly and Rizzocar. So we have a very successful company portfolio, and still with big companies in it extra. But I didn't pick one of the biggest one and one of the most successful one. I picked in my head one that got me super excited in 2020, because after the first lockdown, the demand for this company exploded by time 10. Because it's a company called Cyclofix, and they are only present in France right now, because it's still a very small company. And they do bike and scooter maintenance at home the next day. So you book an appointment to do a bike, the maintenance for your bike or your scooter. And so, as I said, the demand exploded. And they have now so many projects because they found their product market fit and the time to market is just perfect. And they have many ideas at the same time. So they just launched an academy to train a completely new kind of job, which is being a bike repairer. And we don't have enough in France. And so we need to train people. And we launched something new also around the certification of secondhand bikes. So you're sure that when you buy it on any kind of a secondhand platform, your bike is not theft and is in shape, etc. And we have tons of projects ahead. The growth is like that. So it's super exciting to be a board member of this company because it's only positive. So that's why I'm happy with this company in these times that are sometimes a bit boring.
Thanks, Maureen. Sounds really interesting and exciting. Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to pick one, but in the context of this panel, I would highlight a company called EV Energy. What they do is smart charging for the home, and it's not an easy solution, but for the customer, a really valuable solution. Basically, it creates a win-win. The car charges when it's the cheapest or the cleanest, and you can optimize against these parameters. And the customer has an immediate benefit with lower cost, but also the utilities have a big benefit because less stress on the grid. And I really like that value proposition. It's easy to understand. Both parties win. And the company has been growing really fast in the last couple of months. I'm really proud of the team. So I'm looking forward to their journey.
A win-win situation, as you said. Terry, over to you.
So I'll pick two companies. And I'll try to make it quick. So the first one, Virta, the fastest growing e-mobility platform business in Europe, very successful. We just did a 30 million round to the company. And the other one is Ecogy, which is, as I mentioned earlier, I have this hypothesis of going into horizontalization in this industry. So what Ecogy does is the core operating system, open operating system into the charging stations, charging points, so that could become an Android in this ecosystem.
Very interesting. Sebastian, to finish us off.
Yeah, sure. So I will also pick our most recent investment in a company called Battery Resources. It's a battery recycling company with a twist. They basically do cathode to cathode. So they produce out of the recycling process a cathode material that is as performant as virgin material, but 35% cheaper. And it can basically then be used to put it into new batteries. Which is, of course, encouraged by the EU Battery Directive. So a super, super exciting company, one that you will, I'm sure, hear a lot about. And JLR is working with them to do some really, really interesting stuff around recycling.
Thank you, Sebastian. And yeah, that hits on, well, those insights hit on a lot of key themes. We've got hydrogen, micromobility, smart EV charging, battery recycling. So exciting times ahead. So thank you very much to all of the panelists for joining us today and for really engaging discussions. And to everyone who is viewing, I hope it was a useful and interesting 45 minutes. Over to the MC.